I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, cybersecurity stocks jump Monday in the wake of the global WannaCry hack attack. Symantec researchers believe North Korea is behind it. We'll talk to the CEO. Plus, Bill Maris's next act. The former Google Ventures CEO joins us to talk about his new fund and where he's placing his bets in a Bloomberg exclusive. And Apple hits refresh with a new line of MacBooks set for June. All the details later this hour. First, to our lead, we take a look at the evolving threat landscape in cyberspace. This as President Trump discussed highly classified intelligence in a meeting with Russian officials last week. Trump's national security advisor contends the information the president shared with the Russians was, quote, wholly appropriate and based on, quote, open source reporting. Take a listen to General H.R. McMaster defending President Trump's actions from the White House.
What the president shared was wholly appropriate. The story combined what was leaked with other information and then insinuated about sources and methods. So I wanted to make clear to everybody that the president in no way compromised any sources or methods in the course of this conversation.
This all, of course, on the heels of a global cyber attack that is causing the intelligence community to work overtime. So what are the bigger implications of both events for the intelligence community? Mike Riley covers cybersecurity for Bloomberg News and joins us now from Washington. So, Mike, of course, this on the heels of the president abruptly firing the head of the FBI. I'm curious, is Trump having an impact on what's going on in cyber world? Are we more or less vulnerable to a cyber attack because of the actions of the Trump administration?
Well, if he's having any impact at all, it's probably one that is emboldening the attackers rather than the reverse. You know, a lot of people with the new administration thought that Trump would be more aggressive in cyberspace. We had a couple of draft orders of the cyber executive order that showed a different tack. When the order actually came out last week, though, it was a little bit more of the same. And if anything, that seems to have just emboldened the attackers. So we had not just this massive ransomware attack that is spread across the globe, but the shadow brokers, this mysterious group that has been leaking NSA cyber tools, said today that they might decide to do a dump a month, which in other words means that they would release a new set of tools that the U.S. uses in cyberspace every month, which could be have a devastatingly negative impact from the U.S. point of view.
Now, talking about this ransomware attack, what new information do we have? Is it contained yet? Do we know more about the origins?
Well, obviously, the investigation has turned to the hunt for who was behind it. On some sort of global level, the first wave of attacks has been contained. So people are looking for new versions, and they've spotted a WannaCry 2.0 that may or may not be from the same actors, but behaves in much the same way. But I think really where attention is focused is who did this. There's now some reporting by cybersecurity firms that it may be linked to North Korea. If that's the case, this becomes a state operation. A couple of things that might affirm that diagnosis is, in fact, the timing. It was this attack was released around the same time that North Korea did a new missile launch. Some of the things that might cut against that is so far we know that the ransomware, this global attack that struck more than 100 countries, has only netted about $50,000 or so in Bitcoin. So if this is a nation state trying to fill its coffers because it's suffering from sanctions, it's not very effective.
Now, there's a blame game going on right now, Mike. Microsoft is blaming the U.S. government. The U.S. government is pointing fingers at companies like Microsoft. You know, who is to blame as for how it got so out of control?
Well, certainly Microsoft is not going to coming out of this looking good. There was a patch issued when the initial vulnerability was leaked by the same shadow brokers. But everybody knows that not everybody does patches in the way that Microsoft would like them to. And there's just this question of whether or not Microsoft ought to ship their operating systems in a way that's just much, much safer to begin with, or ought to rethink the process in some fundamental way. So however you look at this, Microsoft is not coming out looking good. Is this the intelligence agencies, or is there some move to look at the way that these vulnerabilities were first developed by the NSA that then themselves had some either an insider or a hack that allowed this information to be released. This is the way that nation states work. Not just the U.S. does this, China does this, Russia does this. Everybody does this. This is how they spy. I'm not sure that trying to point the blame at the NSA for doing what it's designed to do is going to really save Microsoft or its reputation.
All right, Mike Riley in D.C., who covers cybersecurity for Bloomberg News. Thanks so much for that update, Mike. Sticking with cyber now, the industry as a whole rallied off the news of the ransomware attacks. Symantec, one of them. The company says it was able to block at least 22 million attempted attacks. Security experts at Symantec also saying they may know who is behind them. Joining me now here in the studio, Symantec CEO Greg Clark. You were nodding as Mike Riley was speaking there, and your researchers believe that North Korea is behind this.
No,
Why?
I think we definitely have produced some evidence that shows that the people that were involved in attacks that were linked to North Korea, some of the code that they use, some fragments of that attack are present in this attack. That doesn't mean North Korea did it. It means that there was fingerprints from the same kind of malware that was used in some of the attacks. Like the gentleman before me mentioned, I think the thing that would indicate that that may not be the case is the size of the ransom request does not track to the size of ransom request that that group usually requests.
So what does that mean?
They were linked to the Bangladesh event, which was an $80 million story. And if you can get inside an enterprise and take over some of their systems and you're going to ransom them to get them back, usually the request is a lot higher than $300 US a Bitcoin. And so that fact doesn't help, I think, with that thesis, but you never know. And I think, what may be another case that is here is that some smaller group got a hold of this NSA vulnerability that was leaked by shadow brokers and wrote a more amateur piece of malware that got out of control on them, was really targeted at consumers, ended up in enterprises because the ransom request is not great. So there's a few theses that are being worked. It's not time to really call that. Law enforcement is all over this, and I think there's some things that we shouldn't talk about yet because we're on it. And but I think the other point that the gentleman made, which is important, Microsoft, and are they culpable for this, is definitely something we should talk about.
Are they?
I think that Microsoft have come a long way in recent years in hardening their operating system and hardening how they deliver patches. And really, this is about vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities come, people become aware of them, and they patch them. And this is about IT and consumers being very quick to adopt the latest patches, whether it be an Apple product, a Google product on Android, a Microsoft product.
So you say you blocked 22 million infection attempts. So how many didn't you catch?
So, we had a very small number of customers call us that were reporting that they had an infection. And we're talking about a really small number in hundreds of thousands of enterprises that run our products. Our products were actually blocking this long ago. And we have some artificial intelligence in our products that blocked it without any help. They figured it out themselves in our artificial intelligence code and stopped it all by themselves in our latest products. And that's a big step forward in the industry. But I think that we have situations where other vendors may have been the defense there who also had blocks for it, but maybe weren't updated. And that's how things got out of hand in Europe.
So that's the lesson learned here, right? And the U.S. was largely unaffected. Why?
Yeah, and I think the U.S. was unaffected primarily, in our view, because the great researchers that got on this problem early and worked it found a situation in this malware that would turn it off and make it go dormant. And that was put in place on a Friday night. And so by the time people kind of woke up and the propagation got to the U.S., the malware was already sort of dealt with from a dormant's point of view. It might have still been propagating everywhere, but not destroying the end systems.
Do you expect spending on Symantec products to increase as a result of this?
Yeah, definitely. I think that every time there is a global event like this, it's a tailwind for cybersecurity firms. We fared very well in it, which is usually an increase in pipeline. We're starting to see that. I think the future is bright for us. Awareness is there, but I think we really are not the kind of firm that gets up and bashes our competitors or bashes the platform vendors. We're really here to try to fight cyber defense, cyber crime. We shared our information with the Cyber Threat Alliance, a thing that we're a member of that has all the other big network security players in it. And we shared that on Friday. So we are trying to help the whole industry. We're a good operator, and huge research investment in this area.
What trends are you seeing under President Trump? Are companies changing what they're spending? Is the threat landscape changing as a result of the actions of the Trump administration?
I would say that cyber criminals are somewhat emboldened, not just, I would say, by the Trump administration, really I think emboldened by some of the effectiveness of some of the attacks. We heard about some things in Saudi Arabia in January that were very concerning. These things, nation states operate on other nation states, even outside the U.S. There's more consequences in the U.S. But cyber criminals are a little bit more emboldened than what we've seen in the past. We produced our annual threat report a couple of weeks ago. In there, we reported that ransomware is on a huge rise. It's up 36%. It's really targeted at consumers because they really have nowhere to go. There's no CIO. Mom's the CIO. And the average price has gone up to over $1,000 to repair. So this problem is rife. It is a way of making money for criminals, and it is definitely an effect on the enterprise, but also on consumers and their sort of digital safety, if you like.
All right. Well, we're going to continue to follow the ripple effects of this attack that are being felt around the world. Greg Clark, CEO of Symantec, thanks so much
Thank you
for
very
joining
much.
us. Really
Pleasure.
appreciate your insight.
Thanks.
Well, in today's revolving door, Twitter co-founder Biz Stone is rejoining the social media company 6 years after he left and just 2 months after selling his search startup to Pinterest. In a blog post, Stone says he will be focused on company culture and will not be replacing another executive. We spoke to Stone last October and asked about the recent challenges at Twitter. Take a listen.
I don't follow the small ups and downs. I don't look at the stock on a quarterly basis. I think great leadership thinks in terms of decades, not quarters. And so I'm just waiting this out. Jack is, in the grand scheme of things, Jack has just gotten the job, basically. And people are like, he's already had it for a year. A year, that's nothing.
Shares of Twitter jumped in Tuesday's session following the announcement. Bloomberg News is among Twitter's video partners. Coming up, former Google Venture CEO Bill Maris is coming back into the VC world, completing his fundraising for his new investing firm. We'll hear from him exclusively about where he's placing his bets next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. After saying he was out, now Bill Maris is returning to the investing world. The founding CEO of Google Ventures has raised $150 million for his new fund called Section 32. Joining us now in an exclusive interview, Bill Maris, former CEO of Google Ventures. At GV, he oversaw investments in startups ranging from Uber to Slack and Cloudera. Bill, great to have you back here on the show.
Nice to see you.
So last time you were here, you said you were out. You said we were at peak VC. The market's too crowded. What changed?
So yes, I'm back. So thank you. I think we still are at peak VC, but I wasn't entirely happy with the fund that I was constituting in terms of the investor base, et cetera. So I decided to take a minute, kind of reconstitute it, and build a smaller, more focused fund. And I think the majority of the companies I'll invest in are built around relationships I've built over the last 10 years or so.
So if we are at peak VC, and Goldman Sachs says there's like $120 billion pent up to invest in technology, how do you break in? How do you differentiate yourself?
Well, hopefully I don't have to break in. Hopefully I'm already in to some degree. And with a smaller fund, I have the advantage to be very selective in the companies that I invest in, the people that I hire. And I think that's in an environment where there is potentially overfunding, selectivity is your ally.
You don't often see lone wolves in VC. You're doing this on your own.
Am I a wolf?
You're doing this from San Diego, where you live, and you're not just investing in health and biotech, but tech proper, which is super competitive. How do you think that you can step up?
Well, I've lived in San Diego for years. I sort of exist in the cloud, I think. So I think especially coming out of San Francisco, the idea that we're limited by geography is kind of crazy. I think Chris Sacca's fund is probably the best returning fund of all time, and he didn't live in San Francisco. So
he also got some partners ultimately.
He did. And I would say stay tuned on that front.
Okay, so you don't necessarily plan to do it all by yourself?
No. I think for now, but not forever.
So where are you going to be placing your bets? I mean, what's exciting to you?
Yeah. So I think that there are. more readily available in my mind are the things that I think are getting excess attention: AI, machine learning, VR, etc. Even healthcare, which I've been a huge advocate for, has become a very trendy area for investment, which means subject to frothiness or overfunding. And that leaves huge parts of the market available, whether in agricultural tech or other applications of tech. For example, I've been spending a lot of time looking at the food chain. So I'm pretty interested in that space.
Interesting that you bring that up, because we've been talking a lot about Juicero, which was a GV investment, and I'm sure you saw Bloomberg did a big piece about how this is a juice machine, got hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, and our reporters here discovered that you could squeeze out just as much juice by hand as with the juice machine itself. I mean, was that a mistake?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we don't know how the company plays out from here. They've got great leadership, and my understanding is they have ample cash available, and it's still going. It's a going concern. I think my time in the Valley has taught me one thing, that some people, when they see a balloon, they just want to pop it. Like, they just want to be like attack and like poke at it, and so I would say there might have been a little bit too much of kicking someone when they're down there.
What about Uber? Speaking of, a lot of PR issues over the last several months, a lot of culture issues, lawsuits.
Yeah.
What's gone wrong there?
The parallels between Uber and what's going on at the White House are just hard for me not to draw. They're having a bad time, and fundamentally, that's probably due to a fundamental lack of leadership. So there's a lot of great people there, friends of mine, and I'd love to see the company pull out of this, but they're having a bad couple months.
So you're comparing Travis Kalanick to Donald Trump. How so?
Well, you're comparing. I said the White House and Uber. Look, I think when it comes to the White House, I think we should be gravely concerned about what's going on there. At least I am.
Why?
First time in my lifetime that I've ever felt that our institutions are unstable or unpredictable. And I think there's one thing that we as a people should cherish, is a little bit of consistency and reliability in our federal government. And I think it's a confusing time.
So what does that mean for Uber? Let's continue with the metaphor.
Yeah. I think when we look at Uber, you've got a company that's transformative, that is in a period of struggle. And I think Google faced that, Facebook faced that. I think this is an unprecedented situation, because it's a company at such scale that generates such attention and is available to consumers kind of all over the place. So I don't know how it plays out from here, but I'm hopeful.
Is Travis still the right person to be leading the company?
I don't think I'm the right person to answer that. I don't work there. I haven't been in their offices in a long time. I think that the employees of Uber are the right people to answer that question, and hopefully they're being asked.
How is Trump impacting the landscape in Silicon Valley, the funding landscape? Is he having an impact? Well,
I mean, I think it's a truism that markets like predictability and not unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns coming out of Washington and surprises, and some of those aren't pleasant ones. I turn on the news every morning and I think, okay, what crazy thing has happened this morning? And that creates a general anxiety. It's not good for the market. It's not good for people.
So how is that going to influence the choices that you make when running your new fund?
I don't know. I think we'll see. I've never really been that influenced by Washington and policymakers outside of, they set the ground rules of the way the market operates, and those haven't changed very much. But the instability in Washington is something to keep an eye on.
All right. Bill Maris, former CEO of GV, excited to see what you do at Section 32. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Emily.
For stopping by. From the cloud, as you say. Coming up, Instagram is adding another signature Snapchat feature. We will bring you all the details next. This is Bloomberg. Ant Financial is delaying IPO plans after losing ground in China's digital payments market to Tencent's WeChat Pay service, according to people familiar with the matter. Alibaba's finance affiliate wants to improve performance and probably won't go ahead with the offering this year. The company was valued at about $60 billion in a fundraising round last June. Disney is being held ransom by hackers. CEO Bob Iger revealed the news to employees Monday. The hackers claim to have stolen an unreleased film identified by Hollywood news outlets as the latest Pirates of the Caribbean movie and are threatening to distribute it online. The alleged extortion attempt is part of the attack infecting 200,000 computers in 150 countries. It comes 2 weeks after Netflix confirmed that hackers were responsible for leaking new episodes of its series Orange is the New Black after the company refused to pay a ransom. And Instagram's copying was already a serious threat to Snap. Now the app is adding another signature Snapchat feature, the ability for people to digitally add animal ears and flower crowns to their selfies. This is very popular. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has said camera tools like face filters will be a major strategy this year as a stepping stone to an augmented reality world. More than 200 million people use Instagram stories a day, compared with Snapchat's 166 million users total. And coming up, we tackle the intersection of politics, tech, and culture with author Nick Bilton. His new book on the epic hunt for criminals behind the Silk Road. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Let's get back to our lead. The fallout over claims that President Trump discussed highly classified intelligence in a meeting with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador last week. This paired with news of a massive cyber attack that has swept the globe, which has huge implications for the intelligence community. Joining us now from LA, Nick Bilton, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, where he writes about technology, politics, business, and culture. He's also the author of a new book, American Kingpin, the epic hunt for the criminal mastermind behind the Silk Road. Nick, we're going to get to your book in a moment, but in writing this book, you got an up-close and personal look at the cyber underworld. We have the situation at the White House changing minute to minute, a potentially warmer relationship with Russia. How do you think this is impacting the cyber threat landscape?
Well, I think the cyber threat landscape is becoming the new threat landscape. You know, we're entering an era where everything is connected to the internet, and as we saw this weekend with the ransomware attack, hospitals can be, taken down, power grids, you name it. And I think that we're just starting to see the very beginning of this. The terrifying thing is that, when these things happen, the government has no idea, who is responsible, how long it's going to take to solve it, and so on and so forth. We were incredibly lucky this weekend that there was a very simple fix that was put in place to solve this problem. But in the reporting I've done about hackers and some of the things that can go wrong, there are some pretty terrifying things out there. And it's not just computers, but it's the infrastructure that powers pretty much everything we do every day.
And what do you imagine is the impact of President Trump and some of his actions on this threat landscape?
Well, I honestly don't think President Trump actually understands this threat landscape. I've spoken to people that have spent time with him in his committees, and excuse me. And when he was going around to the New York Times and all these other media outlets before he actually became president, and people would bring these things up, and I think he just is over his head. He doesn't necessarily use computers on a daily basis. He barely uses a smartphone, and I just think that these things are literally over his head, and he has not staffed the White House with the people that can actually help solve these problems, and he's instead gotten rid of people like James Comey who have a full understanding of this. And I think that we were incredibly lucky this time. I think that there is going to be an instance in the not too distant future where some sort of cyber attack is going to wreak havoc on the U.S., whether it's the financial markets or power grids or what. We have no idea yet.
Speaking of the ransomware attack, the currency of this attack was Bitcoin, the perpetrators asking for ransom to be paid in Bitcoin, which was the currency of the Silk Road. What do you make of that?
Well, the thing with Bitcoin is, no one knows who created it. It's only been around for a few years, and it is supposedly untraceable. With the Silk Road, as I talk about in the book, it wasn't completely untraceable then. There are people that now do money laundering and tumblers to hide this stuff. But the thing with Bitcoin is it goes across nationalities, across currencies, across borders. It doesn't matter. And so, someone in North Korea can tell someone in America, pay me 6 Bitcoins at $1,500 a piece. And there's no way to trace who got it and how it got there, or how it was even turned into actual physical cash later on.
Now, your book talks about the epic hunt for this guy nicknamed Dread Pirate Roberts, a young guy named Ross Ulbricht, who founded the Silk Road, which was basically an online marketplace for drugs, guns, poison. What are the lessons to be learned here? Because you make some ties to the tech companies, the big tech companies of today.
Well, I think that one of the things that's really fascinating is that this kid, his name was Ross Ulbricht, he was from Austin, Texas. He had this very simple idea. What if you could make a website where you could buy and sell anything using Bitcoin, and then Tor, which is the web browser people use to get on the dark web. And he built it. And just in the same way that, Travis and his team built Uber, and Sergey Brin built Google, and in the same respect, it took off. And a couple of years later, he's on track to do $1 billion in sales of illegal drugs and guns and poisons and hacker tools and so on. And he's cloaked by all these tools that people are now using, as we just discussed, to hold companies accountable and hostage and require them to send Bitcoin to send the money. And I think that what I saw in the reporting was that was so fascinating was how difficult it was to figure out who this kid was. You had teams of agents from all over the government, the FBI, the IRS, the DEA, Secret Service, you name it, and it took them 2.5 years, and it was just a completely lucky break that got them there.
So, is it a call to action to tech entrepreneurs, to the leaders of whether it's Uber or Airbnb or Snapchat?
Completely. I mean, when you think about the fact that how reliant we are on technology today. Now, let's fast forward and think about in 5 to 10 years when we have driverless cars. Do you think that a country like North Korea needs to worry about trying to get a nuclear bomb over to Los Angeles when they could hack into the driverless car network and make all these cars crash into each other, or where they can shut down a power grid by using the same kind of technology that the U.S. has tried to use with Iran? And I think that when you see the speed with which these technologies go from an idea like the Silk Road or Uber or something like that to becoming a multi-billion-dollar business, you can see the speed with which they can be used nefariously by bad actors out there, and there are a lot of them out there in the world today.
One last quick question, since you also wrote a book about Twitter. We saw Snap shares, go off a cliff after earnings. Facebook is copying Snapchat features unabashedly. Is Snapchat the next Twitter?
I don't think so, actually. I think that I've spent time with all of these CEOs from all of these companies, and I've always been incredibly impressed by Evan Spiegel, the CEO of Snapchat's ability to understand what millennials want. And I think that you've seen Mark Zuckerberg copy Snapchat several times, and it hasn't worked. It is currently working with the stories they're doing on Instagram, but I think that Evan has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. And don't forget, when Twitter and Facebook went public after their first quarter earnings, both companies' shares fell between 12 and 24%. And so I wouldn't be selling my Snapchat shares if I had them. I think that the company is going to be fine for the next few quarters.
All right, interesting. Author of a new book out called American Kingpin, and Vanity Fair special correspondent Nick Bilton. Nick, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
A tech mover, shares of Etsy rose the most in almost 2 years after TPG and Dragoneer Investment Group disclosed a combined 8% position in the online crafts marketplace. Etsy jumped as much as 23% in earlier trading, the most since July 2015. The stock is still down about $2 a share from its April 2015 IPO price of $16. Coming up, we take you across the pond and speak with the CEO of a major player in the fintech space, TransferWise, how the company plans to weather the Brexit storm. Next, this is Bloomberg. I want to head now to London, where Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde is standing by with a major player in the fintech space. Caroline, take it away.
Emily, great to see you. Thank you. Yes, I'm here with TransferWise co-founder and CEO Taavet Henriques. TransferWise is one of the largest peer-to-peer money transfer services in the UK, in fact, if not the world. Helping move more than £1 billion per month, the company has raised a whopping $117 million in funding to date, and its investors include Silicon Valley heavyweights like investors and advisor Max Levchin and Andreessen and Horowitz, as well as the UK's Sir Richard Branson. Or maybe he's actually part of an island, who knows? He spends most of his time there in the Caribbean. But Taavet, thank you for joining us. And key player in the European unicorn space, big investor names. And you're profitable, lo and behold. Talk to us about whether the profitability was always something you were driving towards.
So we've always known that payments is a scale business. So we've known that as we hit critical scale, we're going to get to the profitability part. And now we've just kind of gotten to the point where we're moving £1 billion a month, 1 million users using TransferWise, and we've hit profitability. But however, our goal remains keeping on investing for the future and making sure we can have the biggest impact and biggest user base 5-10 years down the road.
So do you ever think, when focusing on profitability, the pace of growth has to be reined back slightly because you are looking at your bottom line, or is that not really the case? They can be mutually beneficial.
I think they can be mutually beneficial. So for us, what's been important is to make sure that on a kind of country by country and corridor by corridor basis, we have strong unit economics always. So it's just been the case that when enough of the corridors have reached critical scale, that the company as a whole breaks even. But making sure that the fundamentals are sound, I think, is very important for any business.
Has there ever been any pressure from investors to become profitable? Is this something in the new era where we're seeing perhaps slightly less funding going into startups and slightly more wariness about sustainability of business model? Is that something that people have been calling for, or is this something that you've just driven yourself?
I do think there was a change in the market happened 1-2 years ago, where kind of the craze for growth at all cost changed a little bit. But I do think that companies that have proven that they have sound financials underlying the growth have always been able to raise money, and as such, I think the switch was pretty small, and maybe just some companies who were going way too crazy were kind of called for attention.
Do you think the likes of Uber and Airbnb are still going too crazy, or do you think when you've got that sort of scale, keep on raising?
Well, it seems to me that there are actually two pretty different companies and pretty different profiles, and I think from what we've heard recently, Airbnb, I believe, is profitable or very close to it, versus with Uber we do hear about massive losses. So I think it's very hard to compare them, but I do think that they are doing well.
Is there a European mindset, do you think, that makes the investor base a little bit more cautious, the entrepreneur a little bit more cautious, and therefore looking for profitability that much faster? How do you think we here in London, particularly really escalating in fintech, but perhaps not dominating in some of the other areas, compare to that of Silicon Valley and some of the other tech hubs?
So I think it kind of goes back to the beginnings, and you think about kind of how many companies are being started in Europe. There is a difference in the risk appetite that I think you can feel in Europe. Less companies being started, so obviously you have less companies that get to scale and growth and maturity, and maybe as part of the different mindset, people will take less risk because failure isn't so tolerated, and so they might focus more on becoming profitable sooner.
I see. So therefore, this is something that is very much, interestingly, the data bears it out. European startups, about 60% are profitable. Perhaps that would be a much lesser extent if you look at the United States. Therefore, while you've got profitability, are you looking to raise more funding? Because you're certainly expanding. You've just launched in Asia, for example.
We're in a very good position regarding funding and financing, so we're really focused on how do we make sure that we keep on growing as quickly as possible. We grew more than 100% last year, and we're continuing to do that. So for us, the question is about how do we double down on small to medium business? How do we look at also expanding into other areas?
So talk to us about, therefore, where you're investing to sustain the growth, where you might be expanding into new areas of product. Is it all about hiring engineers, or are you on the marketing phase? Is it all about areas close to transfer of funds and foreign exchange, but expanding that product suite?
So we're a team of 700 people now, which is quite sizable, but we're continuing the hiring, and pretty much we're hiring across all fronts: engineers, marketeers, back office personnel. Kind of, it's all needed to keep on growing the business. Similarly, we're doing it in multiple geographies. A couple of weeks ago, we launched our APAC headquarters in Singapore. We're still busy hiring in the US and also in London and on mainland Europe. We launched a small to medium business offering last year, so that's something which we're very excited about and looking at growing that significantly. And there will be some more announcements coming later this year about adjacent areas that we're looking to expand to.
Taavet, you're a fascinating man because Estonian, came here, of course, worked for Skype, brought your startup and bore it here in the United Kingdom. I look at your Twitter page and you have pinned a statement saying founded by immigrants, built by immigrants, used by immigrants. We are at a case of Brexit is upon us in the United Kingdom. These sorts of geopolitical trends are happening throughout the world. How much has Brexit affected your business? How much do you think it would change your opinion of growing the business here in the UK? You're committed to the area?
So we're definitely committed to being in London. TransferWise is headquartered in London, and London today is the fintech capital of the world. However, when we talk about Brexit, we can't not talk about two things. So for us, the important things about Brexit are, one is access to talent. Every fast-growing company thrives on talent. So if it becomes harder for foreigners to move to London, to move to UK, that's definitely going to be hurting the ecosystem here, and as a result, these jobs will end up being created elsewhere instead. And a second important area is passporting. So Europe has a fantastic system today where one regulator gives you access to 500 million consumers.
Unlike the US?
Unlike the US, where it's state by state. So, and that passporting is unlikely to survive, and we don't know yet, but as pure business contingency, we need to think about how do we keep on serving our customers over on the European side.
Taavet, I wish I could have longer with you. Always wonderful to have you in. A successful angel investor, but also a very successful entrepreneur and some big backers behind you. We look forward to seeing how you continue to grow with TransferWise. Thank you very much indeed. Of course, that was TransferWise co-founder and CEO Taavet Hinrichs joining us there. Emily, sending it back to you in San Francisco.
Caroline, thanks so much. We'll have more of Bloomberg Technology coming right up. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
We're operating at a different frequency, at a different scale, right? We care about different things.
It's diversified, it's a true ecosystem.
You're really changing industries and you're changing processes. You need those skills, you need that information.
The gene editing tool CRISPR is boosting crops, tweaking the genetics of mosquitoes, and creating Lyme disease-proof mice. Now companies are racing to use the technology in humans.
CRISPR is, in my lifetime, probably the most exciting single invention that I've seen.
Editas, Intellia, and CRISPR Therapeutics are the only public CRISPR companies in the US, all with labs in a 3-mile stretch of Cambridge, Massachusetts.
CRISPR is a technology to accomplish what's called gene editing. And this is for patients with diseases that are caused by mistakes in the DNA, the ability to go to the level of DNA and repair the broken gene.
The biotech companies, which all went public last year, aim to first test the technology in relatively simple genetic diseases, where a small genetic tweak can cause devastating damage.
In essence, how this works is, think of a GPS localization signal or a zip code, right? You put a zip code onto what we call a pair of molecular scissors. And the molecular scissors don't work until the zip code delivers the molecular scissors to the part of the region or the part of the genome that we're targeting it to.
CRISPR Therapeutics and Editas want to start human trials by 2018.
CRISPR is moving at a rapid pace. If you had asked me 2 or 3 years ago how long it's going to take to get to the clinic, we would have predicted a much longer time frame than what we're staring at now.
CRISPR Therapeutics wants to start by genetically engineering the cells of people with rare blood disorders outside the body before putting them back in. And Editas aims to inject CRISPR tools into the eyes of people with a rare form of genetically caused blindness. Intellia's Birmingham sounds a more cautious note. His company hasn't given a timeline for when it will put products into people.
Given the fact that we're going in and you're modifying your DNA, which we've not been doing with other therapeutic approaches, there are some considerations we need to be very thoughtful about.
Scientists in China are moving faster. Researchers there started the first CRISPR human trial last year, and scientists have used CRISPR to modify the genomes of human embryos.
Where do you draw the line? That it's a curative treatment or potentially curative treatment for a disease versus an enhancement to an individual.
For now, the 3 leading CRISPR companies in the US are focusing on tackling disease and are in a complex series of patent battles in the US and Europe.
Basically, the issue is about inventorship, right? So who actually invented this?
With the academic groups behind Intellia and CRISPR on one side and Editas on the other. In February, Editas surged after the MIT and Harvard-backed Broad Institute fended off a challenge from UC Berkeley in the US, keeping both patent estates alive for now. Intellia and CRISPR fell in the news and are appealing the decision.
It is too early to say which companies are going to be best at developing drugs at this stage of developing medicines.
Ultimately, human trials in the next few years will tell us more about how this revolutionary technology will change our genes and our health.
I think that the impact, frankly, we're only beginning to understand it. There are 6,000 genetically defined diseases. 95% of them have no approved medicines. So there's a very long list of patients who could potentially be helped with this kind of approach.
That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. This Wednesday, we will be covering the Google I/O conference and speak with Hiroshi Lockheimer, Google SVP of Platforms and Ecosystems, as well as Scott Huffman, Google VP of Engineering. This is Bloomberg.